For more than 100 years, the United States has been waging a war on drugs. A lot has happened in that time, but one thing is clear: they're not winning. In this video, I want to talk a bit about the war on drugs and why it can't ever be won as it is now. The war on drugs in the US began around the same time as Prohibition, with the same spirit as the temperance movement. However, most people today would agree that Prohibition was a mistake. People that wanted to drink still did, and the 18th Amendment created a black market for alcohol overnight, prime for criminal organizations to profit from. But while prohibition on alcohol was ended in 1933, prohibition of other drugs was doubled down and expanded for the rest of the century. In that time, ludicrous amounts of money have been spent, currently tens of billions of dollars annually, for both drug enforcement and for the incarceration of millions of people. That part in particular is interesting. The following quote is from Henry Giordano, Commissioner of the late Federal Bureau of Narcotics, taken right from the DEA's website. The Bureau of Narcotics subscribes completely to the view that the federal government does not consider drug addiction a crime. This is interesting because this has pretty much never been the case. Apart from recent decriminalization efforts in some states, the possession and thus use of drugs has been used to incarcerate multitudes of people. Addiction should not be considered a crime, but that's not how the US government has treated it. Despite the massive effort put into the war on drugs, it's mostly been found to waste money, drive crime, and ruin the lives of many people. Not only is the war on drugs a detrimental thing, it also fundamentally cannot work from a chemical perspective. The production of illicit drugs mainly takes place outside the US, and the drugs are then smuggled inside. This can be combated with more border and customs security, but those who manufacture domestically won't face this issue. And while it is a minor source of drugs in the US, it is a significant one that the DEA has taken notice of. They've tried to control this by restricting what they consider to be essential drug precursors, known to be List 1 and List 2 chemicals. Fittingly, I've named this the War on Reagents. The problem with it is that organic chemistry is amazing, and you can make pretty much anything from pretty much anything else. To highlight how impossible it is to control this, I've created a pathway to make one of the most notorious drugs, methamphetamine, from the most widespread and overall damaging legal drug in the US, alcohol. Practically, this is a terrible pathway, but it's interesting to see it done starting from ethanol. First, we need to make a couple of other necessary reagents. We can react ethanol with an acid catalyst at a high temperature. The acid can be sulfuric acid, such as the acid in car batteries. It's also commonly available in some kinds of drain cleaner, but that's not everywhere in the United States. So we can make ethene or ethylene from that. And then we need some bromine, and that can be made from sodium bromide, such as this used here for hot tubs, and hydrogen peroxide, which you can find at the drugstore, with some acid to make bromine. And when we react ethylene with bromine and water, we can make the halohydrin here. And then we can react that with a base, such as sodium hydroxide, which is probably the most common drain cleaner, to make ethylene oxide, which we'll need later. Now, if we react ethanol with acid at a lower temperature, we can actually make diethyl ether, or just ether here, which we'll use as a solvent later. So the first step will be oxidizing ethanol here into acetic acid. I've chosen to use permanganate here because it's available in rather large quantities. You can see this bottle here is used for aquariums. Then we can make calcium acetate by reacting with calcium carbonate, which is chalk. And then heating that to a high temperature, we can make acetone. And this is kind of an old process, but it does work. For stuff we'll need later, we can pyrolyze acetone at high temperature to make ketene, which is one of my favorite chemicals. And then ketene can be reacted with acetic acid from before to make acetic anhydride, which we'll need for a later step. And ketene can also react with ammonia, commonly found in cleaners, to make acetamide. And then acetamide can be subjected to the Hofmann degradation using sodium hydroxide and sodium hypochlorite, such as that found in bleach, to make methylamine, which we'll also need later. So back to acetone. With an acid catalyst, this can be made into mesitylene, which is 1,3,5-trimethylbenzene. Using permanganate again, we can oxidize these into carboxylic acid groups and then decarboxylate that at high temperature with sodium hydroxide to make benzene, which is a very good starting material. We can then brominate this using bromine from before and a catalyst. The catalyst can be iron tribromide, which in this case is made in situ with some steel wool. That can produce bromobenzene. Then from that we'll form the Grignard reagent. So in diethyl ether, we react it with magnesium, such as that from fire starters, to make phenylmagnesium bromide. Now that Grignard reagent reacts with ethylene oxide to make 2-phenyl ethanol. Now, because we were already using potassium permanganate, we'll use it again to oxidize that to the carboxylic acid, phenylacetic acid. And then that can be reacted with acetic anhydride with some sodium acetate as catalyst, and this can be made from vinegar and baking soda, to make phenyl 2-propanone. Then we can use the methylamine made before. This will add to the ketone, making the imine here. And then that just needs to be reduced in one step to make methamphetamine. The reduction here is done using aluminum amalgam, so it's an alloy of aluminum and mercury. Aluminum such as that from aluminum foil, and mercury is still found in some old-fashioned thermometers. And this is the classic Walter White method. I'm not one to say that I have the solution to addiction, but I think it's pretty clear that the one we have now is ineffective and impossible. I hope that we start to spend less money on enforcement and incarceration and more on programs for public health. Perhaps if enough people want change, then we can finally break free of this 1920s-like prohibition.